Hey everyone, Zian over here from Nintendo Life, and today we are happy to share with you our review of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by PJ O'Reilly for NintendoLife.com and has been reworked into this video by me. Originally released way back in 1993 for the good old Game Boy, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening has always been a bit of a curio in the history of the long-running Zelda franchise. Originally planned as a straight-up port of the Super Nintendo's monstrously successful A Link to the Past, this very first portable Zelda experience soon morphed into entirely its own thing. With its side-scrolling dungeon sections, ability to jump, and host of bizarre cameos from other Nintendo franchises, it struck a new, slightly off-kilter tone. It also very boldly transferred the action from Hyrule to an all-new setting, forgetting franchise staples such as Princess Zelda, Ganon, and even the Triforce, to focus on a completely new and refreshingly philosophical narrative for our tiny adventurer. Now, it's getting a new chance to shine, thanks to this new remake on Nintendo Switch. After a majestically revamped opening cutscene, which sees a ferocious storm tear our hero's ship to pieces, we join Link as he's washed ashore on the mysterious island of Koholint. Coming to, he finds himself in the care of a young girl named Marin, and her bumbling goofball dad, Terran. Quickly setting off to retrieve his trusty sword, he's informed by a wise owl that the only way to leave Koholint is to collect and play the 8 instruments of the sirens, hidden in dangerous dungeons across the island, in order to rouse the great windfish from its slumber, which is sleeping inside a huge egg perched atop Mount Tamaranch. And so begins our adventure. Where the Switch's other Zelda title, 2017's Breath of the Wild, revels in the wide-open nature of its enormous world, casting off the trademark gated progress of older entries in the franchise in favor of a more modern approach, Link's Awakening absolutely thrives in its more traditional ways. This is a game all about slowly unlocking the means to your progression, amassing the tools required to do the job, and the early hours are, in classic Zelda fashion, spent figuring out how to remove the various objects that impede your traversal of Koholint, before getting down and dirty with its bigger bad guys. The puzzles, secrets, and dungeons are amongst some of the very best in the entire series, and if you're one of those people who felt like Breath of the Wild gave you a little too much freedom at the cost of feeling a little less Zelda-like, you'll be right at home, snuggling back into this more classic mold. What was once a monochromatic wonder when it originally released on Game Boy has, 26 years later, been transformed into one of the Switch's most unique and beautiful looking games. A thoroughly modern reimagining, which transforms the island of Koholint and all of its weird and wonderful inhabitants into a beautiful little tilt-shifted toy box, absolutely dripping in tiny new details and atmosphere, ready for you to rediscover or, if you're really lucky, experience for the very first time. Fans of the original game who've played it to death in its previous forms on Game Boy, Game Boy Color, or even Virtual Console will, for the most part, know exactly what to expect as they set out on their journey through this remastered version. The map is identical, NPCs mill about in the same locations as before, conversations are almost word for word the same, and if you were a master of the game back in the day, you'll still be able to speedrun your way through this version too. However, as with any remaster, this is all about breathing new life into something that we all know and love. And in this regard, it's hard to see how Nintendo and Grezzo could have done a better job. This is a supreme overhaul, but not just in terms of the stunning new graphics and art style, but in the reworked score that accompanies them. The old chiptune Game Boy instruments, which were quite something for their time, have been replaced by the majesty of an almost fully orchestrated re-recording of familiar old tunes. It's often some pretty surprisingly emotional stuff, revisiting those magical places you'd long forgotten, rediscovering some hidden passage or other latent memories suddenly reawakening in your mind as this music, so familiar, but also now so new and grandiose, takes flight in the background. Indeed, making your way across this brand new Koholint, all the way from the now sparkling white sands of Tonborough shores, the sun reflecting off the transparent water that laps against its beaches, to the mysterious forest, Enshrouded here in beautifully atmospheric fog effects, you'll constantly be wowed by just how much more alive everything feels. Enemies have seen a host of revisions to how they look, and in some places behave with minuscule details adding enormously to their personalities, giving them a physicality that imbues the moment-to-moment combat and dungeon traversal with a whole new level of satisfying weightness. Buzzblobs wobble around delightfully, a sort of semi-translucent jelly with eyes wrapped in electric shockwaves. Beautifully animated spiders scurry out of their holes to attack you, whilst heavy armored moblins and darknuts will often require that you parry their attacks in order to open them up to counters, adding a nice little tactical layer to the combat. Speaking of combat, the revamped boss battles look incredible, some of which also play out in slightly different ways than you might be expecting if you're an old hand at the game. And the dungeons that you take on in your quest to recover those all-important instruments benefit heavily from the new level of detail and fidelity, in how they're lit and in the highly detailed textures from which they're now built, each one now a much more atmospheric and absorbing affair. And of course, it's not all aesthetic changes in this new version of The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. One of the most often criticized aspects of the original game was the need to constantly switch out gear and equipment due to the lack of buttons on the Game Boy. The Switch, however, has tons of buttons, so it does away with this by having your sword and shield assigned permanently to their own buttons, whilst gear such as bombs, arrows, and the Rock's Feather can be allocated to either X or Y buttons as you see fit. Your Pegasus boots, once you unlock them, can be activated by holding down the left shoulder button, whilst the power bracelet activates automatically whenever you need it, and it all makes for a more streamlined adventure. Another nice little quality of life addition is the ability to add pins to your map in much the same way as you did in Breath of the Wild, making it easier to remember where an item of interest or place you wish to revisit is located. There are empty bottles to find that you can store fairies in for use when you need them most, and the compass now has a handy on-screen indicator which flashes up when you're near a treasure chest, making it that little bit easier to notice when you're too busy being distracted by a puzzle or being battered by an enemy. There are also more hidden collectibles than featured in the original version of the game, with more heart fragments and secret seashells to discover, as well as a handful of new warp points and collectible figurines. Moving from area to area also no longer requires any sort of transition, as was the case of the humble Game Boy. Instead, the island is rendered in one big beautiful seamless whole, and as a result, moving around the various locations feels like an altogether more modern affair. Koholint's map, which still reveals itself bit by bit as you stumble across new areas, seems so small in comparison to most adventure games today, but it has depth. It's a cleverly designed place stuffed full of surprises and secrets. Traversing from one side of this game's world to the other may only take a matter of minutes, but there are countless hours of fun to be had for the completionist here. The new additions continue when you visit Dampé the Gravekeeper at his shack. As you make your way through the various dungeons in the game, you'll unlock dungeon templates, and upon visiting Dampé, he'll feed these templates into his chamber dungeon creator, tasking you with making your way through a bunch of tutorial-style challenges before allowing you to freely put together your own dungeons, which you'll then have to successfully make your way through to earn rewards. Now, it's not exactly Mario Maker Zelda Edition, but as long as you're not expecting to create your own enormous bespoke Zelda dungeons from the ground up, it's a fun enough distraction that we're sure some people will get a lot of extra value from. Dampé's Shack also serves as the location from which you can make use of any of your Legend of Zelda series amiibo. Tapping your amiibo here allows you to unlock some special dungeon templates to use in Dampé's dungeon creator. You can also then save your creations to the amiibo you're using. The Link's Awakening amiibo will also allow you to summon Shadow Link, not Dark Link, Shadow Link, into your dungeons. The malevolent figure will hunt you down until you take him out for a sweet rupee reward. In terms of performance of this remaster, everything looks absolutely glorious in both docked and handheld modes. But it does unfortunately suffer from a little bit of slowdown in certain areas. We noticed it around Tonboro Shores, where there are quite a few Octoroks and sea urchins on your screen at the same time, and it does seem to be a problem that rears its head for the most part in heavily populated locations. It's far from being any sort of a deal breaker, but it's a shame as you can feel in combat from time to time as the game goes from buttery smooth to struggling ever so slightly to keep up. However, small technical hitches aside, this is a phenomenal remake of one of the best entries in the entire Zelda series. The new aesthetic adds a whole new layer of life to characters and locations that we know and love, whilst also absolutely fitting in with the narrative at play. And the little quality of life improvements and changes here and there make the whole thing feel thoroughly modern. The puzzles, dungeons, side quests, and boss battles all feel as good as they did back in the day, and remain amongst the strongest in the franchise. Whether you're getting reacquainted with Koholint and its wonderfully kooky cast of characters, or are a newcomer embarking on your awakening for the first time, there's a ton to look forward to here. Battling through one of the awesome dungeons, grabbing a plush Yoshi from the trendy game, chomping your way through moblins with your pet Chain Chomp, hitting up Grandpa Oria for some tips when you're totally stumped, or just playing some Ocarina with Marin before taking in the views down at the beach, this is a game still every bit as magical as it ever was. And yes, you can still get zapped by the shopkeeper if you'd prefer to live out the rest of your days as a thief. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening was a technical marvel when it first arrived on the scene back in 1993. Easily one of the great Game Boy releases. It was a first bash at a handheld Zelda that took the formula as perfected by A Link to the Past, jammed it all into a tiny portable console, and somehow managed to make it all work while adding a host of new features and concepts to the mix. This beautiful Switch remake rebuilds all of this from the ground up in fine style. It adds modern conveniences, a dungeon creator, amiibo support, and lots of little quality of life improvements, whilst infusing every single square inch of Koholint, every secret passage, piranha, Pokey, and Pig Warrior, with a level of detail and depth that totally reinvigorates its timeless story and classic Zelda gameplay for a whole new generation of gamers. We here at Nintendo Life give The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening on the Nintendo Switch a 9 out of 10. If you'd like to read our full written review, you can find it with a load of other Link's Awakening content over at nintendolife.com.